There is a quiet kind of exhaustion that many people carry today. Not the kind that comes from hard work, but the kind that grows from invisible pressure. Bills that arrive before the previous ones disappear. Notifications from banking apps that feel less like information and more like judgment. A subtle tension in the chest every time someone mentions money. This exhaustion rarely begins with poverty. It often begins with something far more deceptive, the illusion of almost enough. Many people live inside this illusion. The paycheck arrives, the numbers look respectable, the lifestyle slowly adjusts upward to match it. A slightly nicer apartment, a slightly newer phone, a subscription here, food delivery there. Nothing dramatic, nothing reckless, just small upgrades that quietly reshape life. And then something strange happens. Despite earning more than previous generations ever imagined, many still feel the same silent anxiety at night, because income alone does not build security. Habits do. There is a psychological character that appears again and again in modern life. Call this character the prisoner of appearance. The prisoner of appearance does not intentionally chase wealth. Instead, this person chases signals.
The true power
Signals
of
of
this knowledge
success,
lies not
signals
just
of
in its
belonging,
acquisition,
signals
but in
that
its
whisper to the
application.
world, I am doing well. But beneath those signals sits an uncomfortable truth. Many purchases today are not made for usefulness. They are made for reassurance. A reassurance that others will see stability, even when stability does not exist yet. Psychologists have a phrase for this quiet trap: lifestyle inflation. Income rises, expenses rise faster. The gap that could have become freedom quietly disappears. What makes this trap dangerous is that it
Growing the
rarely
margin
feels
between
like a
your
trap.
income and
Each
spending is
decision
key
looks
to
reasonable on
expanding
its
your
own.
financial breathing
The
room.
expensive coffee feels harmless. The upgraded car feels deserved. The new apartment feels like progress. But taken together, these choices build something invisible, a life that requires constant maintenance, a life where the engine must keep running just to stay in place. In this system, time becomes currency. Hours are exchanged not for growth, but for survival. And slowly, another psychological state begins to appear: financial fatigue. A person begins to wonder, why does money still feel scarce even when income grows? Why does the finish line keep moving? Why does freedom always feel just one promotion away? These questions haunt late evenings. They appear during quiet commutes. They appear when someone finally calculates the real costs of the life they have built. Because when the numbers are written down honestly, the truth becomes hard to ignore. Many people are not poor. They are simply overextended. And there is a powerful difference. A person who is poor lacks resources, but a person who is overextended lacks margin. Margin in time, margin in emotional energy. Without margin, even small financial surprises feel catastrophic. A broken phone, a medical bill, a job interruption. Suddenly, the entire system trembles. And so people keep running, working harder, earning more, hoping the next raise will finally bring relief. But relief rarely comes from income alone, because the real trap was never money. The trap was the belief that consumption equals progress. Once that belief settles into the mind, life becomes a treadmill: faster movement, same destination. And yet, somewhere in the middle of this quiet pressure, a different kind of person begins to emerge. A person who notices something unusual. While everyone else chases bigger paychecks, this person begins asking a very different question. Not how much can be earned, but something far more unsettling. How much is actually enough? And that single question has the power to fracture the entire illusion. But very few people are ready for the answer. Because the moment someone begins asking it honestly, the system they have been living inside suddenly starts to look very different. So the real question becomes, what happens the moment someone finally sees the trap for what it truly is? And why do only a few people ever escape it? There's a quiet moment that changes the trajectory of a life. It rarely looks dramatic. No fireworks, no sudden fortune. Just a small realization that lands with unusual clarity. For some, it arrives while reviewing bank statements. For others, it appears during a sleepless night. And for a few, it comes during an ordinary conversation that reveals something unsettling. A friend with half the income, yet twice the peace of mind. This moment introduces a new psychological character. Call this one the quiet builder. Unlike the prisoner of appearance, the quiet builder does not measure success by visible upgrades. The quiet builder measures something far more subtle: control. Control over time, control over expenses, control over future choices. The difference between these two mindsets is not intelligence, it is direction. The prisoner spends first and hopes income will catch up. The quiet builder reverses the equation. Income arrives, a portion immediately disappears into the future. Savings, investments, assets that quietly begin working in the background. At first, this shift feels small, almost insignificant. $10 set aside, a subscription canceled, a lunch packed instead of purchased. None of these actions look powerful. But psychology teaches something fascinating. Human behavior is shaped not by dramatic decisions, but by repeated identity signals. Every small financial decision whispers a message to the brain. Either, I am someone who consumes, or I am someone who builds. Over time, the brain begins to believe the identity it hears most often, and once identity shifts, behavior follows naturally. This is where one of the most misunderstood forces in finance begins to appear: compounding. Most people think compounding belongs only to money, interest rates, investment returns, but compounding begins long before money is involved. Habits compound, skills compound, reputation compounds. A single book read tonight may change how tomorrow's salary negotiation unfolds. A small side project started on weekends may quietly evolve into a second income stream. A skill practiced for 30 minutes each day may become expertise within a few years, and suddenly the trajectory of life bends in a new direction. What makes this transformation powerful is its subtlety. The quiet builder does not appear wealthy at first. In fact, the opposite is often true. While others upgrade their lifestyles immediately, the quiet builder delays gratification. Living slightly below one's means becomes a silent vote for the future. Each saved dollar becomes something unusual, not just money, but a worker, a tiny employee assigned to generate more value: dividends, interest, equity. Over time, these small workers multiply, quietly, almost invisibly. And one day, something remarkable happens. The system begins working for the builder instead of against them. Expenses no longer consume every paycheck. Assets begin producing new income streams. Stress slowly transforms into breathing room. But the deeper transformation is psychological. Because once someone experiences even a small amount of financial margin, a powerful realization appears. Freedom does not come from dramatic breakthroughs. It comes from consistent, almost boring actions repeated long enough. Tracking expenses, investing regularly, learning continuously. None of these actions are glamorous, yet together they create a force stronger than luck. The force of directional momentum. And this is the point where most people face an uncomfortable truth. The barrier to financial change is rarely knowledge. The barrier is patience. Because the quiet builder understands something that the prisoner of appearance never learns. Real wealth grows quietly, almost silently, like roots beneath the soil. And by the time the tree finally becomes visible, the system that created it has already been working for years. So the question quietly waiting for an answer is no longer about income. It becomes something far more personal. If the path to financial freedom is built from small actions repeated every day, then what would happen if those actions started today? And more importantly, what invisible systems are already shaping the next 10 years of life right now? There is a stage in every financial journey where a person begins to see something most people overlook. Money is rarely the real story. The real story is systems. Two people can earn the same income, live in the same city, face the same cost of living, yet 10 years later, their lives look completely different. One person still feels trapped. The other moves through life with calm confidence. What created the difference? Not luck, not intelligence, but the invisible architecture of daily choices. Psychologists sometimes describe this as behavioral momentum. Once a pattern begins repeating, it becomes easier to continue than to stop. That is why certain habits quietly dominate financial life. Scrolling replaces learning, convenience replaces planning, consumption replaces creation. None of these behaviors appear dangerous in isolation, but repeated thousands of times, they shape an entire future. This is where another psychological character emerges. Call this one the drifter. The drifter does not intentionally choose financial struggle. Instead, life happens passively. Money arrives, money disappears. No system directs it, no plan captures it, no structure protects it. And so every month becomes a reset button. Earn again, spend again, repeat again. But there exists a quiet alternative. The quiet builder eventually discovers something unexpected. Financial freedom is less about earning more and more about designing the flow of money. Instead of asking, "How much did I earn this month?" a different question appears. Where did every dollar go? At first, this question feels uncomfortable because numbers tell stories people sometimes prefer not to hear. 5 small daily purchases may quietly equal thousands each year. Subscriptions that felt insignificant accumulate into silent leaks. Impulse spending becomes a form of emotional relief. But awareness changes everything. Once spending is tracked honestly, money stops behaving like water slipping through fingers. It begins behaving like a resource with direction. This is the moment when another principle enters the story: living below one's means. Many people misunderstand this phrase. It does not mean living miserably. It means building space. Space between income and spending. Space between stress and stability. Space where opportunity can grow. Because without that space, every unexpected event becomes a crisis. A car repair, a medical bill, a temporary job loss. Without margin, these events feel like earthquakes. But with margin, they become manageable waves. This is why one of the most powerful financial tools is surprisingly simple: the emergency fund. At first, it might be small, just a few $100s, then slowly a few thousand. To outsiders, it may look unimpressive, but psychologically, it creates something profound: security. And security changes behavior. A person with financial breathing room negotiates differently, takes opportunities differently, even thinks differently. Fear no longer dictates every decision, but something else begins to grow: confidence. And confidence opens doors that fear quietly keeps closed. Around this time, another transformation appears. The quiet builder begins to treat money not as something to spend, but as something to deploy. Savings turn into investments, investments turn into ownership, ownership turns into leverage. Stocks, index funds, small businesses, digital skills that can generate income from anywhere. Each asset becomes a small engine working quietly in the background. Individually, these engines look modest, but together they form something powerful: multiple streams of income. And this is where the psychology of money begins to shift completely. Instead of asking, "How long must I work?" a new question appears: how many systems are working for me? Because when income begins arriving from several directions, something remarkable happens. Stress decreases, choice increases, life becomes flexible again. Yet even at this stage, one obstacle still stands in the way. It is not knowledge, it is not opportunity, it is something far more subtle: the comfort of old habits. Because the most difficult part of change is not learning new ideas, it is becoming a different person long enough for those ideas to reshape reality. And this raises a question that quietly determines the future. If systems truly shape financial destiny, what system is currently shaping yours right now? And more importantly, is it building freedom or quietly extending the same cycle for another decade? At some point, every person reaches a moment where two futures stand side by side. Both look possible, both look real. The difference between them is rarely dramatic. It is built from choices so small they almost seem unimportant. One path belongs to the cycle of reaction. Bills arrive, money disappears, life feels rushed. The other path belongs to the builder, a person who slowly designs life instead of constantly reacting to it. What separates these two paths is not a single heroic action. It is something quieter: consistency. Financial transformation rarely begins with large amounts of money. It begins with a shift in attention. Instead of asking what can be purchased today, attention moves toward what can be built over time. This shift may look simple on the surface, but psychologically it changes everything. Because when the mind begins thinking like a builder, everyday moments become opportunities. A commute becomes a classroom through audiobooks. Idle time becomes space for learning a new skill. A small idea becomes a side project. A side project becomes a second income stream. And slowly, the system begins changing. One of the most powerful ideas in personal finance is surprisingly humble. Small actions repeated consistently melt mountains. Saving $10 may feel insignificant, but saving $10 every day begins to tell the brain a story. The story that growth is happening. The story that control is increasing. And once the mind believes progress is possible, momentum begins. Momentum is the invisible ally of every builder, because once habits form, they begin operating automatically. Money moves to savings before spending begins. Investments happen on schedule. Skills grow gradually. The system runs quietly in the background. This is why wealth often appears slow at first. For years, progress may feel invisible, but beneath the surface, something extraordinary is happening. Knowledge compounds, discipline compounds, relationships compound, and eventually, money begins compounding too. The person who once struggled to save a few dollars now owns assets. Assets begin producing income. Income begins creating freedom. But perhaps the most surprising part of this journey is not financial, it is psychological. Because somewhere along the path, the builder realizes something unexpected. The goal was never simply money. The goal was freedom of direction. Freedom to choose meaningful work. Freedom to rest without fear. Freedom to help others without calculating the cost. This kind of freedom rarely arrives suddenly. It grows quietly through patience, through systems, through thousands of small decisions no one else ever notices. And that is the paradox of wealth. From the outside, it sometimes looks like luck. From the inside, it is usually the result of ordinary actions repeated with unusual consistency. Tracking expenses, learning continuously, creating more than consuming, living slightly below one's means. None of these ideas feel revolutionary, yet together they create a life that feels very different from the one most people experience. A life with margin, a life with stability, a life where the future is no longer something to fear, but something to shape. And so the real question is not whether financial freedom is possible. History has shown countless ordinary people achieving it. The real question is far simpler. When the next hour arrives, what small action will quietly begin building the life that future self will one day thank you for? Because the system that shapes the next 10 years does not start tomorrow. It begins with the very next decision. And sometimes, that single decision changes everything. There is a moment that rarely receives attention. No applause, no audience, just a quiet decision made somewhere in an ordinary evening. It might happen while looking at a bank account balance, or while calculating monthly expenses, or during a quiet walk when the mind begins asking questions it once avoided. Not dramatic questions, but honest ones. Questions like, where is all of this effort actually leading? For many people, life becomes a cycle of activity without direction. Work harder, earn more, spend more, repeat again. Years pass inside this rhythm, and yet something still feels missing. Because deep down, most people are not searching for luxury. They are searching for relief. Relief from financial tension, relief from constant urgency, relief from the quiet fear that one unexpected event could collapse everything. This is why the final transformation in financial life is not mathematical, it is psychological. It begins when a person stops chasing appearances and starts building structure. Structure in spending, structure in saving, structure in learning, and most importantly, structure in thinking. Because thoughts quietly become habits, habits quietly become systems, and systems quietly become destiny. At this stage of the journey, something interesting begins to happen. Money stops feeling emotional. It becomes strategic. Every dollar receives a role. Some dollars protect the future through emergency savings. Some dollars grow quietly through investments. Some dollars expand opportunity by building new skills. Instead of disappearing, money begins circulating with purpose. This is the moment when financial life becomes calmer, not because problems disappear, but because the system can absorb them. A broken appliance becomes an inconvenience instead of a disaster. A job change becomes a choice instead of a panic. Even risk begins to feel different, because a strong financial foundation allows experimentation, new projects, new ideas, new paths that once felt too dangerous to attempt. But perhaps the most surprising shift happens internally. The builder begins to feel something many people have not experienced in years: control over the future. Not perfect control, life never works that way, but enough control to breathe, enough control to think clearly, enough control to imagine possibilities again. And once imagination returns, the horizon expands. What once looked like a life sentence of endless work begins to transform into a landscape of options. Work can become meaningful instead of merely necessary. Time can become flexible instead of scarce. Energy can move toward creativity instead of constant recovery. All of this begins with something remarkably simple: a decision to act. Not tomorrow, not next month, but within the next hour. Because financial change rarely requires heroic effort. It requires starting small and refusing to stop, tracking expenses for the first time, canceling a forgotten subscription, opening an investment account with a modest amount, learning a skill that can eventually generate income. Each action may feel minor, but repeated consistently, they create something powerful: momentum. And momentum quietly reshapes identity. The person who once felt trapped becomes someone who builds. The person who once feared money begins directing it. The person who once drifted begins designing life intentionally. This transformation does not require extraordinary talent. It requires something far more accessible: clarity, discipline, and the willingness to begin before everything feels perfect. Because the truth about wealth is surprisingly simple. It rarely arrives suddenly. It grows quietly inside systems built day after day. And one day, often years later, a person looks around and realizes something remarkable. The anxiety that once defined life has faded. The pressure that once controlled decisions has loosened. And in its place stands something calm and steady. A life built intentionally. A life where money is no longer the master, but simply a tool. And so the final question remains: if the next 10 years will pass no matter what happens, what system is being built today that will shape them? Because sometimes the most powerful financial decision is not complicated at all. It is simply the decision to begin.